In this presentation, we're going to investigate the potential for applying human performance technology to educational technology and e-learning. We begin by defining the three terms, then we're going to move into analysis of some of the recent associated literature. Then we'll present some logical arguments for principles of HPT applied to EdTech and e-learning. And then we're going to wrap up with an example from the corporate world. So, human performance technology. Many practitioners have offered definitions for HPT. Kang and Melenda authored an entire 25-page journal article exploring this very topic. In the end, they came up with a rather lengthy definition, including elements from each of the many examples, as shown here. However, essential elements from the early days of HPT lost emphasis, while other questionable elements found their way into the definition. Academia reinforces this phenomena by mandating citations with X number of years. As a result, definition becomes fad and original intent is lost. So instead, we prefer the definitions of old, founded in evidence rather than in experience, and logic rather than the latest trends in academic and political theory. Joe Harless, one of the pioneers in the field, defined HPT as the process of analyzing, designing, developing, and evaluating interventions that most cost-effectively influence performance that is of greatest value to the goals of the organization. So then, an element critical to HPT is interventions. The logic behind this element stems from early failures at improving performance through training. It was discovered that means other than training were often required because the cause of the performance gap lay in areas other than lack of skill. Therefore, HPT takes a step back from training to a higher level of intervention analysis, interventions which form a set that includes training rather than being dominated by training. Value in light of organizational goals stands as yet another critical component of HPT. Value may be thought of as the benefits of a given intervention minus the costs associated with devising, implementing, and maintaining that intervention. This emphasis on value came out of costly training from which the resulting benefits just didn't justify the costs. So while there remains much more to HPT, these two critical elements alone have been lost in modern attempts at implementing HPT. In a review of 14 peer-reviewed journal articles purporting to apply HPT, we found that none of them addressed value in any meaningful way. Furthermore, intervention was typically assumed, even if authors backtracked and provided analysis justifying that assumption after the fact. As glaring as these two omissions are, there remains a third and likely more egregious shortcoming in these examples. In every instance where an evaluation was included, it invariably consisted of surveys or participant interviews, which result in nothing more than subjective opinion. While these opinions may be combined and analyzed in a scientific manner, the result remains subjective opinion. In HPT, we are seeking improvement in human performance. As such, improving opinions is virtually never the actual goal, and we are therefore not truly evaluating the effectiveness of our interventions. So moving on to educational technology, as with HPT, EdTech means different things to different people and organizations. A simple Google search reveals many such definitions. For example, one of the top returns from such a search comes from the School of Education at Loyola University in Maryland, which defines EdTech as the field of study that investigates the process of analyzing, designing, developing, implementing, and evaluating the instructional environment, learning materials, learners, and the learning process in order to improve teaching and learning. Of course, this definition directly includes the ADDIE model. While it may be argued to be the most prevalent model in use for instructional system design, ADDIE is not the only model. Thus, this definition seems a bit too narrow and prescriptive. Furthermore, it suggests that EdTech involves designing and implementing learners. Another prominent hit points to the definition and terminology committee of the Association for Educational Communications and Technology. They broaden the definition of EdTech somewhat to be the study and ethical application of theory, research, and best practices to advance knowledge as well as mediate and improve learning and performance through the strategic design, management, and implementation of learning and instructional processes and resources. In this case, we once again find the word ethical creeping into the definition, just as in the more modern definition of HPT. Generally speaking, the insertion of ethics into every definition implies an unhealthy desire to control others and seems wholly out of place in these definitions. Instead, perhaps it would be better to simply define the words and combine those definitions. So, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, educational is defined as providing education or relating to education, while education is defined as the process of teaching or learning, especially in a school or college, or the knowledge that you get from this. Technology is defined as the study and knowledge of the practical, especially industrial use of scientific discoveries. With a bit of common sense modification too, and combination of these individual definitions, we arrive at the study and knowledge of the practical use of scientific discoveries relating to the process of teaching or learning. Turning to e-learning, once again, we find many definitions. The Cambridge Dictionary defines e-learning as learning done by studying at home using computers and courses provided on the internet. However, e-learning commonly takes place in many locations other than one's home, such as coffee shops, libraries, and even at work. Furthermore, e-learning does not have to be delivered via the internet. Thus, the definition is too narrow. The Association for Talent Development defines e-learning as a structured course or learning experience delivered electronically, can also include performance support content. Unfortunately, this definition is likewise too narrow. Microlearning consists of standalone modules that do not necessarily fit into traditional structured courses, although they can. Thus, the structure mandate in this example seems overly confining. Indeed, when we consider the vast amount of learning from random YouTube videos, it seems rather presumptuous to eliminate that content from the realm of e-learning. Oxford Languages defines e-learning as learning conducted via electronic media, typically on the internet. This seems a more reasonable definition, and even though it does suggest internet, it doesn't mandate that aspect. Furthermore, it does not narrow e-learning down to a single physical location. So if we combine these three definitions, we end up with the process of analyzing, designing, developing, and evaluating interventions that most cost-effectively influence performance that is of greatest value to the goals of the organization relating to the study and knowledge of the practical use of scientific discoveries relating to the process of teaching or learning conducted via electronic media, typically on the internet. So that would be HPT as applied to EdTech and e-learning. So looking at performance, the definition and indeed the very name of HPT implies the influence of human performance. However, this becomes a bit messy when combined with EdTech and e-learning, as now we have to define whose performance we seek to influence. That is, practitioners in the fields of EdTech and e-learning seek to influence the performance of students. So then when applying HPT to these fields, do we seek to influence the performance of the practitioners or the performance of the students? We suggest that ideally the ultimate goal of EdTech and e-learning is interventions for the purpose of influencing student performance. As a result, we likewise submit that application of HPT to EdTech and e-learning seeks to indirectly influence student performance. This is accomplished through direct influence applied to EdTech and e-learning practitioner performance. Of course, further confusion stems from which student performance we seek to influence. That is, do we seek to improve performance in the educational setting or the performance post-education? Given the fact that intervention itself is not the end goal of HPT, the obvious answer to this question lies in student performance after the intervention of education. Combining these two assumptions, HPT applied to EdTech and e-learning seeks to indirectly influence student performance after education by directly influencing practitioner performance. Thus, we must first establish the desired student performance post-education. Then we must link that performance to EdTech and e-learning interventions that improve it. Having accomplished these two tasks, we begin to define the performance desired from our EdTech and e-learning practitioners. The preceding exercise stems from the HPT goal of influencing performance. Influence implies change, which we can assume is for the better. If we are to improve performance, we must not only define that in performance, we must do so in such a way that it can be measured. Otherwise, how can we determine if it can be improved? That is, if we are to identify possible areas of performance improvement, we require a reliable and accurate means of assessing that performance. This includes both the metric as well as the means of measuring. This is where procedures associated with new performance diverge from those addressing existing performance. For existing performance, having identified our metric and instrumentation, we measure the existing performance and compare it to the desired performance. However, when dealing with new performance, we cannot achieve a baseline as we have no existing performance to measure. Thus, we are simply estimating what we think can be accomplished from the new performance. In either case, the metric and instrumentation remain critical components of HPT. Interestingly enough, EdTech and e-learning represent specific interventions. As such, their automatic application to improving human performance prior to analyzing and comparing them with alternative interventions violates the principles of HPT. So then, once the applicability of the intervention has been established, only then can we seek to apply HPT to improving practitioner performance. This follows directly in line with linking practitioner performance to student performance outlined previously. Indeed, HPT practitioners may often find no lack of skill necessary to indicate a need for training or education. In such cases, other forms of intervention addressing the actual problem are required. For example, motivation heavily influences human performance. Likewise, the environment in which the performance takes place has a role in determining the quality and quantity of performance. Therefore, HPT may only be applied to EdTech and e-learning once a gap in skill justifying education has been identified. Value provides the lens through which we analyze and compare both performance as well as intervention. Value may be calculated from the benefits associated with accomplishments produced through improved performance, minus the cost of the intervention. This calculation may be rather simple if the benefits and costs are both monetary. However, although costs will likely always be monetary in nature, other forms of benefit complicate the analysis. In such instances, value must be assessed through aligning the accomplishments with the goals of the organization. In such cases, value becomes somewhat more subjective and difficult to justify. Because HPT focuses on improving human performance, the only true means of evaluating an intervention lies in measurement of that performance. As noted previously, surveys and interviews measure opinion, and opinion is not performance. This is where the initial development of metrics and instrumentation comes into play. These are not only used initially to measure the actual performance baseline, they are also leveraged during evaluation to determine if intervention had the desired impact on performance. Evaluation becomes more complex in K-12 and higher education, as well as corporate training not implemented by the corporation itself. In these situations, it may be impossible to evaluate student performance post-intervention. So then summative assessment prior to exit becomes critical as a slightly less accurate means of evaluation. Although performance in the actual end setting may not be possible, summative assessment should seek to replicate these conditions as closely as possible. So, summative assessment in these situations not only serves as a measure of individual performance, the combined data serves as intervention evaluation. This is where HPT clashes with modern educational theory, which tends to eschew summative assessment, particularly when applied to evaluation of teacher and institutional performance. We frequently hear the pejorative high stakes being applied to such summative assessment. Nevertheless, when on-the-job evaluation cannot be performed, summative assessment and its cumulative data provides the most likely means of evaluating the learning intervention. So let's take a look at a corporate example. So a large American corporation sought to employ asynchronous e-learning in lieu of instructor-led training. HPT was not applied to this endeavor. As a result, the program faces considerable challenges and potential elimination. Let's analyze how HPT may have helped and indeed may still help in this situation. In terms of performance, the first two courses developed focused on performance necessary for production of an automation controller program, including fundamental logic. This training was aimed at new hires. However, as this performance already existed among other employees, this performance was only new to the students. As such, an existing baseline of performance may have been assessed. It was not. Thus, the only measure of performance desired from these students was that they produce the specified file. This could have been improved upon by, for example, providing a base time for producing said file. Nevertheless, performance was fairly well defined. The chosen intervention of training seemed justified in that the new employees likely would not already possess the skills necessary in this specific instance. However, in cases wherein already experienced employees were hired, a test out was provided. Unfortunately, multiple choice and multiple response questions replaced actual production of the specified file, which does not accurately represent the desired performance. The specific application of EdTech in the form of asynchronous e-learning fulfilled organizational goals at reducing travel expenses associated with in-person instructor-led training. However, while a general understanding of cost savings associated with these travel expenses was known, the cost of producing the intervention was never tallied. Expenses such as hours of design and development time were not closely monitored and totaled. This is a shame not only in terms of valuing the intervention, but also in terms of setting a baseline of designer and developer performance. As a result, current efforts towards improving this performance remain elusive, partly due to a lack of data surrounding existing performance. This then snowballs into an inability to accurately value future course design and development. In addition to neglecting evaluation of practitioner performance, the program failed in evaluating student performance, both in training as well as post-training. Individual assessment consisted of the very same multiple choice and multiple response questions leveraged for the test out. So, although students had the opportunity to exercise their skills in a virtual hands-on environment, these efforts were not assessed, nor were they tracked in any way. Although no evaluation of actual student performance exists, specific examples of failure have come to light. These classes were intended to prepare students for following instructor-led training that required the skills taught. Indeed, the detailed task analysis leading up to the development of these courses specifically targeted tasks identified by the instructors of those following courses. However, several students coming into these classes have admitted to having not availed themselves of the provided hands-on experience. Furthermore, their performance, as well as the performance of several other students, exhibited an inability to complete the necessary tasks. As a result, remedial training was required, slowing down planned progression of these follow-on classes. Differences in performance between students who had completed instructor-led training and those who had completed the e-learning were stark. Due to the lack of comprehensive evaluation, it remains unknown as to whether the intervention is effective. This is because the examples of failure may have resulted from students not completing the labs. However, it may also be that those hands-on labs are insufficient. At this point, the way forward involves implementing such evaluation as will answer this question, at which point further modification may proceed, informed by the accurate evaluation. So then, given the preceding analysis, HPT can positively influence both EdTech as well as e-learning. However, given analysis of recent application of HPT, fundamental principles are frequently missed, resulting in less than optimal performance. So, when applying HPT to EdTech and e-learning, practitioners must apply the following principles. Student performance must be clearly defined, measured in an existing state, and estimated in its desired state. Practitioner performance must be clearly defined, measured in its existing state, and estimated in its desired state. EdTech and e-learning must never be assumed to be the ideal intervention. HPT requires analysis and comparison of potential interventions, including those other than training. The value of intervention must be calculated in units that allow for comparison across interventions. Evaluation of student performance based upon initial definition and measurement must be employed. Although survey and interview may be valuable for other purposes, they do not suffice when evaluating student performance. Evaluation of practitioner performance based upon initial definition and measurement must be employed. The following are the references looked at when putting this presentation together. Thank you for your time and have a great day.